In the build-up to elections, you might hear people say, "Why should I bother?" Or, "What's the point of voting? It's not like my vote will make a difference." But while one vote may seem insignificant in the context of an electorate of over 27 million people, it can actually have a big impact on the overall outcome of an election. Why? Because South Africa uses a system of proportional representation. And in such a system, a small handful of votes can mean the difference between getting or losing a seat in Parliament. You're wondering what proportional representation means, aren't you? Well, let me explain what it is. In its simplest form, proportional representation is a voting system where the number of seats a candidate or a political party wins in an election is proportional to the number of votes received. In other words, in a proportional representation system, citizens cast their votes for a party or for an independent candidate, and then seats in Parliament are distributed based on the proportion of votes received. Let's explore an example to illustrate precisely how the system works in the context of South Africa. We like to call this lesson election mathematics. Seats in South Africa's National Assembly and provincial legislatures are allocated based on a system of ensuring that any individual or political party meeting a certain minimum number of votes will secure a seat. For instance, in the National Assembly, which has 400 seats in total, 200 are regional list seats and 200 are national list seats. The IEC determines seat quotas and allocates parliamentary seats based on the total number of votes cast in the election divided by the total number of seats in Parliament, which is 400. To avoid the IEC having to allocate fractions of seats, one seat is added to the total number of seats available in the National Assembly, making it 401. This calculation establishes the quota, or the number of votes needed for one seat. So, if out of the 27 million South Africans registered to vote in the 2024 elections, only 18,700,000 actually turn out to vote on election day, the number of votes it will take to win one seat in Parliament will be 18,700,000 divided by 401 seats, which equals 46,634. However, because independent candidates are now able to contest the national and provincial elections, seat allocation to the National Assembly actually begins with the allocation of regional list seats for independent candidates. In this case, since the number of seats in the National Assembly for each region or province is predetermined based on population, Gauteng, as an example, has 48 out of those 200 regional seats. The votes cast for these regional seats are then divided by the total number of seats in that region to determine the quota for one regional seat. So, if 6,380,000 people were to vote in Gauteng in the next elections, the quota for each of those regional seats would be 6,380,000 votes divided by 48 seats plus 1, which equals 130,205 votes per Gauteng regional seat in the National Assembly. Independent candidates who win more votes than this quota will still only be able to occupy one seat. Even if they win many more votes, they still won't be allocated a second or a third seat. This may seem unfair, but one person can't occupy more than one seat, so they forfeit any additional votes, and they are not reallocated anywhere else. After the independent candidates' regional seats in Parliament have been allocated, the same process is then applied to allocate seats for political parties also on the regional list. There's only one difference. When political parties have excess votes which don't meet the seat quota, these votes are reallocated using what is called the highest remainder system. We'll discuss this in more detail shortly. Now that the 200 regional list seats have been allocated, the IEC moves to allocating the remaining 200 national list seats, which only political parties are eligible to contest. The calculation is as follows. The total number of valid national votes is divided by the total number of seats in Parliament plus 1. So, if there are a total of 18,700,000 valid votes cast in the next election, That number is divided by 400 seats plus 1 for a total of 46,634 votes per seat. This number is the quota for one national list seat in Parliament. What this means is that under the same scenario, once all the votes have been counted and all the parliamentary seats have been allocated, there could very well be national list MPs from Gauteng who needed only about 46,000 votes to win their seat, sitting right next to regional list MPs who needed over 130,000 votes to win their seat. In other words, some members of Parliament will need more than 3 times the number of votes of their national list counterparts to occupy seats in the same parliamentary chamber. The IEC uses this quota to determine how many national list seats in total the political parties should be allocated based on their proportion of the national vote. And then they subtract from this total the 200 regional seats which have already been allocated. The remaining allocation is how the 200 national seats will be divided amongst political parties. When calculating seat allocation this way, there will always be extra remaining votes that don't meet the seat calculation quota. But in a PR system, every vote is supposed to count. So to deal with this, the Independent Electoral Commission uses what is called the highest remainder system to allocate seats for any remaining political party votes. The way this works is that all remaining seats after the first allocation has been made are then reallocated to political parties with the highest remainder of votes. This is one of the ways in which a proportional system is meant to ensure that no vote goes uncounted.